Montana Territory, August 1877. The first shot split the morning stillness just as Delaney Jacobs set down her pail beside the well. She dropped to her knees, heart pounding, eyes scanning the ridge beyond the barn. Smoke curled from a rifle barrel up on the hill. She spotted them now. 2 riders. Maybe 3. Dust kicked up behind their horses as they circled back around. Delaney's grip tightened on her father's old Henry rifle leaning against the post. She had known they would come. Word had spread fast after her husband died. Last winter died, choking on his own blood from the fever while she held his hand, and the snow fell steady outside. Folks thought because she was small, quiet, and alone with 2 children under 10, that her land was up for the taking. They were wrong. She ran to the house, threw open the door. "Hattie, hold your brother's hand. Take him to the root cellar." Now, Hattie, only 8 but sharper than most grown women Delaney had met, grabbed little Hollis by the wrist and yanked him toward the trapdoor behind the stove. Delaney waited until she heard it slam shut before she turned. The front door blew open with a thud. She raised her rifle. The man who stepped in was lean, mid-30s maybe, with a scar under his left eye and a pistol already drawn. He froze when he saw her aiming right at his chest. "You do not belong here," she said, voice steady. "Turn around." He laughed low. "You think one woman's gonna stop us from claiming what's already ours?" She fired. The bullet missed his heart by an inch, but the message landed. He stumbled back, clutching his shoulder. She slammed the door shut behind him, bolting it. Then she ran to the window, breathing hard. The rider on the hill was gone, but another was coming down the trail fast. She raised her rifle again, but this one was different. He rode upright, not like a raider, and his horse was lathered with sweat, like he had been riding for hours. As he got closer, she saw the badge glinting on his chest. He pulled up outside the fence and raised one hand. "Ma'am," he called, voice deep and calm. "Name's Colter Evans. I am not with them." She kept the rifle up. "That's supposed to mean something to me?" He dismounted slowly. Saw smoke. Heard the shot. Figured someone needed help. The door behind her creaked. She turned quick. Hattie was peeking out from the cellar stairs, her face pale. "Stay down," Delaney said softly. "Just a minute more." She stepped out onto the porch, rifle still aimed, but lower now. The man Colter stood still, hands empty. "You law?" she asked. "No, ma'am. Used to be. Texas Rangers. Now I ride fence lines for the cattle company over west." I was heading to Baker's Post when I saw the dust. Behind her, the wounded raider groaned, trying to crawl. Colter's eyes flicked to the blood trail. "You shot him?" "He came into my home." He gave a slow nod. "Good." She studied him. He looked tired, sun-worn, but his stance was steady. There was no greed in his eyes. No hunger for her land. Just concern. She finally lowered the rifle. "Not completely. Just enough. I could use another set of hands," she said. "I do not scare easy," he answered. That was how the cowboy stayed. By sundown, they had dragged the wounded man to the barn and tied him there, left him for the sheriff who Colter said would come through by week's end. The other riders had not returned, but Delaney knew they would. They always did. Inside the house, she lit a small lamp and set stew on the table. Hattie and Hollis sat close, still shaken. Colter leaned against the wall near the door, his hat resting on his knee. "Why would they want this place?" Hattie asked, voice small. Delaney stroked her daughter's hair. "Because they think it is easy to take. Because they think your mother will not fight." Colter looked at Delaney, then really looked. They thought wrong. She met his gaze. Something shifted in her chest. Not relief. Not yet. But something warmer than fear. That night, after the children were asleep, Delaney stepped out onto the porch. The moon hung low and orange over the hills. Colter sat on the top step, rifle laid across his lap. "Why did you stop?" she asked. He shrugged. "I've been on my own a long time. Long enough to know when someone is in over their head. I am not in over my head. I know. That is why I stayed." She sat beside him, a few inches of space between them. "Your husband?" he asked gently. "Gone since February. Fever took him quick." "I am sorry." She nodded. "We built this place together. Every board. I buried him beneath the cottonwood." Colter looked out across the yard, where the wind swayed the tall grass. "Men like that, those who came today, they do not care what it took to build something. They only want what is easy." "Well," she said, "they picked the wrong widow." He chuckled low. You are right about that. Silence settled between them, not heavy, just quiet. Then Delaney said, I do not need saving. He turned his head. I know, but every fighter deserves someone watching their back. And for the first time in months, she let herself lean just a little toward someone else. Not because she was weak, but because she had fought alone for long enough. Colter rose before first light, boots already laced, saddle blanket tucked under one arm. He didn't knock. Just eased open the barn door and stepped inside, where the sorrel mare Delaney used for hauling firewood nickered softly in her stall. He didn't need to be told what needed doing. The fence line along the south pasture had a stretch leaning like a drunkard's gate, and the broken gate post by the east run let calves wander too close to the tree line. He'd seen it all on his walk to the creek the evening before, though he hadn't said anything. Saying too much too soon just made folks stiffen. By the time the sun cleared the ridge, he'd mended 6 yards of rail with spare boards from the tool shed. He was hitching the last nail when Delaney stepped out onto the porch, sleeves rolled, apron dusted with flour. She didn't wave or call out, just watched for a quiet spell, then disappeared back inside. Later, she came out with a tin plate and a folded cloth. She walked the length of the yard and held it out without a word. Biscuits, still warm, and a strip of salted pork. Colter took it, nodding once. Thank you. You're working before I even ask, she said. That's either kindness or guilt. Neither, he said around a bite. I don't like wasting daylight. She crossed her arms, eyes narrowing slightly. You plan on riding out today? No, he chewed, swallowed. Figured I'd mend the gate. Paint's flaking on the barn door too. She studied him a moment longer. And after that, he didn't answer right off. He set the plate down on a barrel, wiped his hands on his trousers, then met her eyes. Don't reckon I've made up my mind yet. Her mouth pulled tight at the corners. Not displeased, not pleased either, just cautious. Fence needs more than one day's work, she said. He nodded. She turned to go, then paused. Hollis gets nervous around new folks. Don't take it personal if he doesn't speak much. I won't. And Hattie reads everything she can get her hands on. She'll ask questions. Don't lie to her. I won't do that either. Delaney gave a faint nod and went back inside. By noon, he'd finished the gate. Hattie appeared in the doorway, book in hand, and wandered over, dragging a stool behind her. You know how to ride without a saddle? She asked, sitting. I do. Did you ever steal cattle? No. Did you ever shoot a man? He paused, then looked her in the eye. Yes. She nodded, not startled. Was he dangerous? He was. She flipped a page in her book. Mama's better with a rifle than most folks around here. I noticed. She studied him over the top of her page. She doesn't laugh much anymore. Colter didn't speak, just looked back at her until she dropped her gaze. She used to sing while she stirred batter, Hattie added, quieter now. He didn't respond, because he didn't know how. He just reached for another plank and kept working. That evening, clouds rolled in heavy and low, and a sharp wind pushed down from the hills. Delaney moved the chickens to the coop and checked the latch twice. When she came inside, her hair was damp from the mist, and her hands were cold. Colter was drying his coat near the stove. Hollis sat cross-legged nearby, stacking small wooden blocks into a crooked tower. Delaney knelt beside him, tucking his shirt back into his waistband. You eat? She asked, not looking up. Not yet. She stood and went to the kitchen. A few minutes later, she returned with a plate cornbread and half a roasted onion. She handed it to him without ceremony and stood by the stove, arms folded. You knew they'd come again, he said after a while. She nodded, eyes on the fire. He set the plate on the table and leaned forward. You've got no neighbors close enough to help. No hired hands. That man in the barn's got friends, and they'll want to finish what they started. I'm aware. Then let me stay. She straightened slightly. You already are. I mean longer. Through the fall, if need be. Help with the harvest. Get the place in shape before the snow. She watched him, face unreadable. Her silence stretched long enough, he thought maybe he'd overstepped. Then she said, I can't pay you. I didn't ask. And I won't be beholden. You won't be. She exhaled slowly, then nodded once. You can sleep in the loft. There's a cot and a quilt up there. He didn't thank her, just crossed to the ladder and climbed up. Hours later, with the house still and the wind sighing through the walls, Delaney stood by the window, fingers wrapped around a mug of warm water. Across the yard, The barn stood quiet, dark save for the lantern Colter had left glowing low in the loft above. She didn't know what he'd lost, or why he rode alone. But she knew the way he moved through the day deliberate, without waste, and the way he looked at her children, with a gentleness that wasn't forced. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it was something close. A beginning. And for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like she was holding the entire world up by herself. The first frost came early. Delaney woke to the sound of a crow's wings beating against the cold air outside her window, and when she stepped onto the porch, the grass was silvered and stiff beneath her boots. The garden rose had gone quiet overnight, beans withered on the vine, and the last of the squash hung like forgotten lanterns on brittle stems. Colter was already in the field, coat buttoned to the throat, his breath rising pale against the morning. He wasn't working, just standing there, looking out past the tree line. She followed his eyes and saw it 2 hoof marks near the far ridge, fresh and overlapping. They were here again, he said when she reached him. She crouched, touched a print. 2 riders, same horses from before. Could be they're testing the edges, he said, looking for where the fence is weakest. They won't find it, she said, standing. They might not need to, he answered. Later that morning, Colter saddled the gelding and rode out. Said he'd scout the ridge and swing through the canyon bend, see if they'd camped nearby. Delaney didn't ask him to go. She didn't have to. She spent the hours he was gone inside with the children, showing Hattie how to twist yarn from scraps of wool and coaxing Hollis into stacking firewood by the hearth. Her hands stayed busy, but her mind kept drifting toward the hills. She hadn't realized how used she'd grown to the sound of Colter's boots crossing the porch or the quiet way he filled a room without needing to speak. He returned just before dusk, the horse sweating and his coat dusted with burrs. Found ashes near the stream bed, he said, stepping down. Still warm. Delaney didn't flinch. They'll try again soon. Likely tonight. She nodded once. There's a Winchester in the loft. You know how to use it. He didn't answer, just went inside and fetched it. By sundown, Hattie and Hollis were already in the cellar, wrapped in quilts with a lantern lit low. Delaney took position behind the front window, while Colter settled into the hayloft with a view clear to the ridge. The hours passed slow. An owl called once, then silence. The wind picked up near midnight, rattling the loose edge of the barn roof. Then hooves. Delaney didn't move, didn't breathe. A single rider this time, creeping along the fence line, silhouetted by the moon. Then another joined him. Colter's rifle cracked once, clean and quick. The first man fell from his saddle with a dull thud. The second turned to run, but Delaney was already at the door. She stepped out, rifle raised. "Don't," she called. The horse reared, spooked, and the rider tumbled off. He scrambled, but she was on him before he got to his feet, pressing the barrel to his neck. "Get up," she said. He did, slow, hands raised. Young, maybe 20. Too young to carry a pistol with that much ease. Colter walked down from the barn, rifle slung now. "I know him," he said. "Name's Eli McCrae. Works under Briggs, out of Fort Peck trail line. Briggs sends boys to do his thieving now." Delaney asked, voice flat. Eli shifted on his feet, jaw tight. "Briggs said this land was left behind. Said the woman was near to folding." Colter looked at her. "You look like you're folding?" She didn't answer. They tied Eli to the corral and buried the other under a stand of cedar, no words said. Come morning, they would send word to the sheriff again, though Delaney didn't expect much of it. As the sun broke over the hills, Delaney poured 2 mugs of coffee and carried one to the porch where Colter sat, arms resting on his knees. He took it without a word. She sat beside him, quiet between them for a while. "I never thought I'd stay here after he died," she said finally. "I told myself I'd sell it, take the children east. But then spring came, and the soil turned, and I couldn't leave him under that tree alone." Colter nodded, not looking at her. "I never had a place to stay put. Always figured I'd know when I found it." She glanced sideways. "And now?" He drank, then set the mug down. "Now I think maybe I was looking in the wrong way." She folded her hands in her lap. "The land's too much for one person, even with help. I've been thinking about fencing the north slope, running sheep come spring. But it's too much alone." "You're not alone." She turned toward him fully, eyes steady. "You planning to ride out once the trouble's gone?" "No, not even if the sheriff clears the rest of them." He shook his head. I was tired before I ever got here, Delaney. Tired of drifting. She reached over then, slow, and laid her hand on top of his. His fingers folded around hers like it had always been meant to happen that way. He didn't speak, and she didn't need him to. The ridge was quiet now. The fence would hold through the winter. And for the first time since the snow fell last year, Delaney Jacobs felt something more than survival stir in her chest. She felt home. October settled into the valley with a slow hush. The cottonwoods along the creek turned brittle gold, and the wind carried the scent of smoke and distant snow. On Delaney's land, the days began earlier now and ended with the kind of quiet that made even the chickens roost sooner. Colter spent most mornings finishing repairs on the shed behind the barn. He'd found a cracked axle under the tarp and spent 3 days straight sanding, shaping, and fitting a new one. Delaney didn't hover. She watched from a distance, her thoughts full of things she hadn't let herself plan for in a long while. One afternoon, while Hattie showed Hollis how to press dried leaves into their Bible, Delaney stepped out to where Colter was oiling the wagon's sideboards. He looked up when he heard her boots in the gravel. "There's a man named Beecham comes through from Red Lodge every fall," she said. "Trades sheep and seed for preserved goods." Colter wiped his hands on a rag. "You thinking of taking the wool south next season?" "I'm thinking of not losing another winter's worth of income to coyotes and rot." He nodded, waiting. "I've got jars. Dried apples. Blackberry jam. Some pickled beans I put up in July. If you ride with me to the outpost, I can get enough in trade to start with 6 ewes. Maybe 7, if Beecham's feeling generous. You want me to go with you? I want someone watching the trail. It's a 2-day ride. I'll ready the horses." He didn't ask where they'd sleep or who would watch the children. He already knew. That evening, Delaney packed a saddlebag with cloth-wrapped jars while Colter chopped extra wood for the house. Hattie stood beside him, arms full of kindling, watching the sky. "Will you be back before Sunday?" she asked. "Quicker, if the wagon holds up." She hesitated, then said, "Mama doesn't like riding out anymore." "Not since last time." Colter didn't answer. He just reached for another log and added it to the stack. They left at dawn. Hollis clung to Delaney's skirt at the gate, his mittened hand tight in hers. "You'll stay with your sister," she said, brushing his hair back. "And you'll listen to her." He nodded, blinking fast. Colter crouched beside him. "You know how to keep the fire going?" Hollis nodded again. "Good man." Then they rode out, the wagon creaking behind them. The trail to the outpost wound through narrow cedar breaks and over 2 dry creeks. They camped that night beneath a bluff that shielded them from the wind. Delaney built the fire while Colter unsaddled the horses. "You ever worked sheep?" she asked, handing him a tin of beans. "Some. My uncle ran a flock in Llano when I was a boy. Learned how to shear before I could shoot." "You ever shear wrong?" "Once. Took a strip of hide off a ram's belly. My uncle made me carry the wool on my back the whole ride home." She laughed, quiet but genuine. Then they ate in silence, the fire popping between them. Later, as the embers died down, she stood and dusted her hands. "There's room in the wagon bed if the ground's too hard." He looked up. "You offering or warning?" "Just saying what's there." He nodded once. "I'll be fine here." She didn't argue, just turned, stepped up into the wagon, and lay down with her coat wrapped around her shoulders. The next day, the outpost came into view just past midday. A lean cluster of buildings and a wind-battered sign that read Beckett's Rest. Beecham was already there, his cart loaded with spun wool and a few chickens in a cage. Delaney traded without fuss. Her voice stayed firm, her eyes sharp. When Beecham tried to undercut her on the jam, she stared him down until he added another sack of feed to the pile. Colter stood beside the wagon, watching the exchange without stepping in. He didn't need to. By late afternoon, the wagon held 7 sheep, a new salt block, and a bolt of burlap. "You'll need a better pen come snow," Colter said as they headed back. "I know." They rode side by side for a while, the sheep bleating behind them. Then Delaney said, "I never thought I'd want to build more here. You don't have to explain it. I want to." He looked at her, waiting. "After my husband passed, I thought the only thing left was to keep the roof from falling in. I didn't let myself want anything else. Not more animals. Not laughter. Not." She trailed off. "Not someone to ride beside you." She didn't speak. He reached over, took the reins from her hands, and slowed both horses to a stop. The sheep jostled behind them, restless but contained. I'm not good with promises I can't keep, he said. But I don't mean to drift anymore. Delaney's jaw clenched, not against anger, but something deeper. I don't want help, she said. I want someone who knows how to stay when the weather turns. I've lived through worse than Montana frost. She looked at him then, really looked. His eyes weren't full of charm or apology, just steadiness. She stepped down from the wagon and walked around to him. He met her there, boots in the dust, the sky stretching wide and open above them. Delaney reached up, touched the side of his face with fingers that didn't tremble. I'm not afraid of being alone, she said. I know, but I'm tired of waking up to silence. He didn't answer with words. He just leaned down, pressed his forehead to hers, and let the hush between them say what needed saying. When they rode back into the homestead the next evening, Hattie ran from the porch, Hollis on her heels. The sheep scattered behind the fence. The firewood was stacked high by the door. Delaney looked at Colter as she slid from the saddle. Looks like they managed fine. He smiled, slower than before, but no less certain. Then we're building something worth staying for. The wool was spun by late November. Delaney and Hattie worked the wheel in shifts, hands steady even as the wind howled through the cracks in the kitchen walls. The sheep had taken to the pen well enough, and Colter had strung extra wire around the posts before the first snow settled in. The barn stayed warm with straw layered thick and a lantern lit through the coldest nights. Inside the house, quiet changed its shape. It no longer came wrapped in grief or silence too large to fill. Now it lingered in soft footsteps, in the scrape of a chair drawn near, in Colter's breath beside her as they read aloud by firelight. He'd found an old volume of folktales in the trunk she kept beneath the bed, and Hattie liked the ones about foxes best. Hollis listened with his chin propped on his hands, eyes wide. Colter didn't ask questions about the past anymore. He didn't have to. The way she moved through her days told him all he needed to know. Her hands never paused. Her eyes saw everything. And when she leaned against the doorframe at the end of the day, he knew it meant she trusted the roof would hold another night. One afternoon, after a morning spent splitting logs behind the pasture, Colter came in with blood crusted below the knuckle of his thumb. Delaney took his hand without asking, and for the first time, he let her care for something broken in him. You've a bad habit of wrapping your fist around things too tight, she said, dipping the cloth into warm water. He watched her work, her brow drawn in concentration. Learn that young. Some habits don't leave easy. Some shouldn't, she said. But this one's no use to you here. When she finished, she didn't let go right away. His hand stayed in hers, quiet and warm, until the door creaked and Hattie came in with her arms full of twine. Colter left to finish the fencing along the far slope before dark, and Delaney sat at the table, rolling the cloth tight. She realized she hadn't asked when he planned to leave in weeks. She didn't ask now. The first snow fell on the first day of December, soft and thick, blanketing the ground in silence. That evening, Delaney found Colter in the barn, brushing out the mare's coat by lantern light. She's got a limp in her back leg, she said, stepping inside. I noticed, he answered, not turning. Started after the last haul to Beckett's Rest. I'll walk her out each morning, build up the muscle again. She leaned against the stall. You've stayed longer than I expected. I don't measure time like I used to, he said. Used to count it in miles. Now I count it in chores needing doing. And when the chores are done, he set the brush down, finally facing her. Then I stay anyway. The stillness between them was different now. Not tense, not uncertain. Just waiting. You sure? She asked. I've had a long time to think about what matters. And I know it's not the next town down the trail. Delaney stepped forward, slow but certain. Her hand found his. Hattie's been asking when she can call you something other than Mr. Evans. What did you tell her? I said that's up to you. Colter's grip tightened around her fingers. Then tell her she can call me whatever she likes. So long as I'm here when the sun rises. You will be, she said. You're home now. That night, after the children were asleep and the fire burned low, Delaney and Colter sat on the porch beneath the stars. The sky was clear, sharp with cold. She wrapped a blanket over both their shoulders, pulled tight against his side. I used to think I had to carry it all alone, she said. The land, the children, the fear. You don't, he said. I know that now. He looked down at her, eyes steady. You ever think you'd love again? No, she said. But I do. Colter kissed her then, slow, without urgency. It tasted of warmth, of wood smoke and promises made without words. When they pulled apart, she rested her head against his chest. "I want to marry you," she whispered. "When the frost breaks." He kissed her hair. "Then we will." Spring came late that year, but it came. They married beneath the cottonwood, with Hattie holding a bouquet of dried lavender and Hollis gripping Colter's hand like he'd always belonged there. The lambs followed them through the sloped grass, bleating softly. Neighbors came from as far as Fallon's Ridge. They brought preserves and wool, a new kettle, a quilt stitched with initials that weren't just Delaney's anymore. Colter built a new room onto the house by summer, and Delaney planted hollyhocks along the fence. Hattie got her own small plot to grow herbs, and Hollis learned to ride bareback with Colter steadying the reins. They didn't speak of the winter before or the men who'd tried to take what didn't belong to them. The land had held. The family had grown. The quiet was no longer empty. It was full of footsteps, and laughter, and love that had taken root deep, weathered, and true.